The world is full of people performing sanity because looking normal has become easier than explaining what is actually happening inside a person. In 1956, sociologist Erving Goffman argued that social life works like theater. People learn how to present themselves depending on the room they're in, what to reveal, what to hide, what version of self is acceptable on stage. He wasn't calling people fake, he was describing something more uncomfortable. Society doesn't only shape behavior, it teaches people which part of themselves are safe to show. This idea is still relevant because the stage has expanded. It is no longer only the office, the dinner table, or the public street. It's the phone, the profile, the message thread, the image, the constant sense of being interpreted. The real strange thing about modern suffering is how often it remains compatible with ordinary life. A person can keep working, keep answering, keep appearing reasonable, and still feel privately removed from everything they're doing. Nothing dramatic has to happen. There may be no scene, no breakdown, no visible proof that something has gone wrong. The day continues, the body cooperates, the language remains intact. From the outside, the person appears stable. From the inside, stability may only mean they have become very good at hiding the part of themselves that no longer feels alive. This is why so much pain goes unnoticed. People are usually recognized as unwell only when they become difficult to ignore, when the suffering interprets the schedule, damages the performance, or becomes inconvenient to the people around them. It is finally given a name. Until then, it's often mistaken for personality. A quiet disappearance can be called maturity. Emotional distance can be called independence. Exhaustion can be called ambition. The refusal to need anything can be called strength. A person learns the cost of being fully honest. They learn which feelings make conversations heavy. And that's how you learn to develop a public version of yourself that's easier to carry into the world. At first, this public self is useful. Everyone needs some version of it. No one can survive by exposing their entire inner self in every room. The problem begins when the performance has nowhere to end, when there's no private space, no honest relationship, no silence, no art, no ritual, no place where the person can stop translating themselves into something acceptable. Without that space, the performance starts to become identity. The person no longer says, "I'm acting fine." They say, "This is just who I am." The mask becomes familiar enough to feel natural. The life becomes organized around avoiding the feelings that might disturb it. What once was protection becomes a way of disappearing. This is not an emotional problem, it's culture. The modern world often treats functioning as enough. If someone is still useful, still available, still productive, still able to perform the expected version of themselves, the deeper question is rarely asked. Is this person actually present in their life? Does the life they are maintaining still belong to them? Or have they become a caretaker for the version of themselves that everyone else finds easier to understand? The question is uncomfortable because it threatens the surface, and the surface is what modern life protects most. We currently live in a culture that has made visibility almost consistent, but witnessing increasingly rare. Visibility means a person can be seen. Witnessing means they're actually being met. A profile can be visible, a face can be visible, a routine can be visible, but the inner life of a person requires attention of a different kind. It requires time, patience. It requires someone to stay past the polished explanation. Most attention now does not stay that long. It reacts, categorizes, and moves on. This teaches people to make themselves quickly understandable. Pain has to become a caption. Identity has to become a style. Even vulnerability has learned how to perform. A person can confess something publicly and still avoid being truly known, because confession itself can become another form of control. This is the strange cruelty of the age. Even honesty can become a part of the act. Byung-Chul Han writes in his book, The Burnout Society, about a world where people no longer only pressured by the outside authority, they become projects of themselves. They exploit themselves under the language of freedom, achievement, and improvement. The result is a person who appears free, but cannot stop proving their worth. This helps explain why performing sanity feels so normal now. People are not only trying to convince themselves they're okay, they're trying to convince themselves if the days stay organized, if the voice stays steady, if the body keeps producing evidence of control, then maybe the emptiness can be treated as temporarily. Maybe the distance from the self can be explained as tiredness. Maybe the quiet dread can be postponed until after the next obligation. But postponement has a cost. A person can only ignore their inner life for so long before it begins to speak in other ways. It may appear as irritation, numbness, envy, exhaustion, or strange feelings of wanting to escape a life that looks perfectly breathable from the outside. The truth does not disappear because it is made inconvenient. It becomes indirect. This is why many people only notice the damage when life becomes quiet. Motion can hide almost anything. A busy life can create the illusion of meaning because there is always something to do next. But silence removes the disguise. It asks whether the person is living or merely maintaining. It asks whether the work has purpose or only momentum. It asks whether relationships actually contain genuine intimacy or if it's only a role. It asks whether the self is still present or only represented. This is the terrifying part. A person can narrate their life perfectly and still not feel present inside it. They can explain what they do, where they're going, what they're trying to become, and why everything is supposedly fine. But explanations are not presence. A life can be described accurately and still feel unreal to the person living it. This is the real danger of performing sanity. It does not simply hide pain from other people. It can eventually hide the person from themselves. The role becomes so practiced, it begins to answer before the soul does. The person knows what they're supposed to say before they know what they actually feel. They become fluent in the language of being okay while losing the ability to recognize when they are not. And in a culture where you just need to lock in, this will rarely be interrupted. You'll be congratulated for the person that's being composed, rewarded when staying productive, admired for your ability to endure. And endurance is not always the virtue. Sometimes endurance becomes the name we give to stay inside conditions that are quietly destroying us. There is a point where strength stops becoming strength and becomes fear with better manners. Resilience keeps a person connected to life through difficulty. Disappearance allows difficulty to consume the person while the outside remains acceptable. One is survival with a pulse, the other is survival as an act. The world is full of people performing sanity because sanity has been confused with manageability. If someone is easy to be around, they are assumed to be well. If they do not disturb the room, they are assumed to be at peace. If their pain does not require anything from anyone, it becomes almost invisible. But being easy to manage is not the same as being whole. Sometimes most normal versions of a person is simply the version that asks the least from the world. This is where the performance becomes tragic. The person may be loved for the mask before anyone ever meets the wound. They may be praised for the calmness that was built out of fear. They may be admired for the independence that began as disappointment. They may be valued for giving so much because they learned somewhere along the way that needing too much made them unsafe. None of this makes the performance fake. It makes it historical. Every mask has a part. It was learned somewhere. It was shaped by the rooms where honesty created trouble, where need was embarrassed, where the feeling of anger was punished, or sadness had to become humor, and where being difficult meant being abandoned. A person does not perform sanity for no reason. The performance was probably intelligent before it became exhausting. This is why the goal is not to rip the mask off. The goal is to stop mistaking it for the whole face. There's a difference between having a public self and being trapped inside one. Human beings need form. They need restraint. They need ways of moving through the world without spilling anything everywhere all the time. But they also need contact with something unperformed. A thought that does not need approval. A feeling that does not need editing. A conversation where the truth is not punished. A private hour where the self is allowed to exist without becoming useful. That's how your sanity becomes a costume. A costume worn long enough to begin to feel like skin. This may be why art matters so much. Real art interprets the performance without depending on an explanation. Art gives people a way to feel understood without having to perform their suffering. It lets someone feel witnessed without being exposed, whether it's a film, a painting, a sentence, or a song. This is what many people are looking for now. Not another piece of advice, not another method, not another system for becoming optimized, healed, productive, attractive, wealthy, disciplined, or impressed. They're looking for language that proves the hidden thing that's real. They're looking for someone to describe the life beneath the performance without turning it into a lesson too quickly. At least I think so. Because some truths should not be rushed into usefulness. Some truths need to remain uncomfortable for a while. They need to disturb the surface. They need to make a person wonder whether their life that appears normal is actually costing more than it admits. Maybe sanity is not the ability to look fine. Maybe sanity begins when a person can tell the difference between peace and performance. between calmness and numbness, between strength and self-assurance, between being understood and being easy to deal with. Maybe the saddest part is that the performance usually began as survival. The person learned when to stay quiet, when to be useful, when to become easier to love, and for a while it worked. But what protects someone in one season can bury them in another. At some point, the mask stops guarding the face and starts keeping the face from being touched. This is why some people are tired in a way sleep cannot fix. They are tired from the distance between who they are and who they have learned to be. A normal life can be built on that distance. A respected life, a life that makes sense to everyone except the person living it. So maybe the question is not, am I okay? Maybe the question is, who taught me that being okay meant being less of myself? Because beneath the performance, there is often a self that did not disappear because it was weak. It disappeared because disappearing once felt safer than being known. And maybe returning to yourself does not begin with changing your whole life. Maybe it begins with one honest moment where the performance is no longer mistaken for peace. Because a life can survive being managed from a distance, but it can only become real when the person living it finally comes back.